To tell us about smart schools and how to better understand behaviours that are evolving, we've got Boulet and Kate Greer from Sustainability Victoria.
At the risk of being that guy, I'm suspecting that maybe some of you might just need to stand up and stretch for a moment. I did this with a group earlier in the morning. I don't want to be like the BehaviourWorks Oz aerobics guy, but I think for the time it takes me to pour a glass of water, just have a stretch.
Noted.
So thank you. We've actually BehaviourWorks has created a little bit of a social norm here. We told you that Josh Wright would be coming to talk after lunch, and then we gave you a slightly different version. If those of you who've been lured in to hear Kate and I talk about understanding the behaviours, resource-smart schools, does environmental education reach beyond the school gates, we're following the social norms set by Liam and giving you something slightly different. So it's not our fault, it's our behaviours. We did start the conversation at that level and then realised BehaviourWorks and the ResourceSmart Schools team in Sustainability Victoria have actually done a number of projects over a period of time together. And we actually thought it's those projects in conjunction with each other and how they build on each other, which is actually quite an interesting story. And there's some really neat lessons that could be extracted from that in terms of what it meant for the program, but also what it means for a relationship between researchers and a government-run program. And we figure for this audience, you fall in one of those camps, probably, primarily, and you might be thinking about, well, how do we actually engage with the other side? And there might be some useful lessons that come out for that. So what we're going to do is give you a little bit of an overview of ResourceSmart Schools and what BehaviourWorks has done for that particular program over the last few years. Then Kate is going to reflect on some of the lessons from those research projects, and then Kate and I together will be reflecting on some of the lessons from not our relationship, but the relationship between the two programs as well. So we're throwing lots of lessons at you today. So Kate, I might hand it over to you, talk about that first.
Thanks, Mike. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ResourceSmart Schools, it's a framework that helps schools embed sustainability into everything they do. It helps them manage their energy, waste, water and biodiversity across... the relationship's quite good usually, but sometimes there's a bit of feedback. And they manage those across campus improvement, school culture, curriculum and community engagement. It's got a long history. It started as an Australian government-funded pilot in 2003 as the Sustainable Schools program. Today, ResourceSmart Schools, it's funded by the Victorian Government, managed by Sustainability Victoria and delivered in partnership with a range of organisations around the state, including waste and resource recovery groups, some not-for-profit organisations and water authorities. More than 1,200 Victorian schools have participated in the program. That's more than half of Victoria's schools. And collectively, they saved more than $12 million. And this is quite an extraordinary achievement for a program that was primarily set up as an educational program, that we've got some strong data about what it's, some financial savings and some environmental savings. ResourceSmart Schools is a remarkable story for many reasons, and it's a program that Victoria can actually be really proud of. But instead of dwelling on the outcomes, the fantastic outcomes of ResourceSmart Schools, Mark, if you could talk about some of the BehaviourWorks projects that you've been involved with.
Okay, I will. Here's a slide I prepared earlier. So there's probably four main pieces of work that BehaviourWorks has done with the ResourceSmart Schools program. And I need to acknowledge actually the work of James Curtis, who particularly led some of the earlier work with this, with ResourceSmart Schools. And the first piece of work is what actually the Beyond the School Gates title came from, was there was a question in the program of, we've got this assumption that what we do with kids in schools around sustainability should have a flow-on effect to what happens in the household and maybe even broader in the community. So Jim did a piece of work, a literature review, to actually say, well, is there any evidence to support that? And found there's not a lot of studies that actually have looked at that. And the studies that have looked at that, there's not strong empirical evidence to show, in fact, that there is an impact. And that led to a broader conversation within the ResourceSmart Schools program about the overall impact and effectiveness of the program as a program within itself. And some colleagues then from the Faculty of Education at Monash University as well were involved in doing a fairly large review with a number of stakeholders, particularly within schools and external to the program, to look at what's working, what's not working, where are the impacts, where might the impacts be missing, and so forth. So there was a broader research project around the ResourceSmart schools that actually grew out of a literature review that Jim did to start off with. That then fed into the next piece of work that BehaviourWorks did, which was to look at an organisational management framework that schools could use to facilitate change internally. And again, drawing on the literature to show what this could look like and offering that to schools as a resource to use. We then, the ResourceSmart was in a position where it needed to put up some bids for new rounds of the program itself. So there became a question again about impact, but also a question about what next. And BehaviourWorks, together with the Faculty of Education again, we did some review of the program, but also developed a number of scenarios as to where the program could be going based on what it's doing at the moment, and engaged with over 100 different stakeholders at the forum, next door actually, I think, to actually give some evidence and some ammunition, if you like, for ResourceSmart to go and say, this is what our bids will look like now for the next stage of the particular program. And we're just now actually, in the next couple of weeks, going to develop an options paper for what a monitoring and evaluation and research framework could look like for the new version of ResourceSmart schools, hopefully when it gets its next tranche of funding to survive for the next couple of years as well. So that's what we've done. Kate, I'll hand it over to you to reflect on some of the lessons for your project from that.
Great. There have been numerous lessons from each of these pieces of work, but today we thought instead of focusing on the individual pieces, that we'd look at what the 5 lessons, I guess, that will be applicable to the people here in the audience today. So the first one, and Mark just mentioned this before, was about challenging the assumptions. For many years it has been said that ResourceSmart Schools delivers beyond the school gate impacts, and we all like the idea of that. But we came to realise that we don't actually have any evidence that it does indeed do that. There's reasonable assumptions sitting behind the claims, however, that we only have snippets of anecdotal evidence to support it. And it's our job as practitioners to challenge the assumptions and ensure that the program outcomes that are reported are indeed based on evidence. Hence, we embarked upon the LIT review, thank you, James, to find out what research has been undertaken to determine these impacts. And this brings us to lesson 2. Our second lesson, which has also been talked about here a bit today, is about getting specific. The literature review found that the research and evidence of beyond the school gates impacts is limited, not just for ResourceSmart schools, but much more broadly than that. However, the review found that there are numerous factors at play when trying to influence behaviours beyond the school gate, and we found that we do have some of those factors operating within our program. We now better understand what the factors are and what we need to take into account if we are going to have these impacts, and that to respond to them we need to be designing specific interventions that target specific audiences and specific behaviours. The third lesson is about making comparisons. In both the Beyond the School Gates impact piece and an organisational change framework investigation, we learnt the value of comparing ResourceSmart schools to other programs, and this can be quite a daunting task to take the lid off your program, look inside it and see how it compares with the competition. We actually, during both of these pieces of work, we identified that many of the critical success factors for beyond the school gate impacts and for organisational change were actually embedded in the way we delivered our program. So this was a really pleasing finding. The comparative process really helped us to recognise and validate our program on what we were already doing, and that puts you in a position of confidence to then go forth and make more changes. The fourth lesson, and this is my favourite one, and it's been quite a powerful experience, I guess, over the last couple of the years, has been about engagement. In both the research project and the review that we did with BehaviourWorks and Monash, the value of the engagement has been immeasurable. Firstly, it gave much better content in the final documents because we got broad views in that. But the engagement we had through workshops and conversations with the team was thought-provoking and energising for people in the moment, and has really meant that we've been able to have much richer conversations about where we're going to take the program next. And this has been evident even this week when we had another workshop with our consortium partners, and they kept referencing this process we went through with the review. The final lesson from the project is that research is a starting point, and now I haven't been set up here by BehaviourWorks, but the fifth lesson was that it doesn't give answers, it just raises more questions. And it's meant that we've questioned things, and it's meant that we've been able to further understand what it is we're actually doing and what we don't know. So going back to Mark now, to think about the relationship between the researcher and the practitioner.
Thanks, Kate. I'm thinking about this. There's probably three main things that have certainly come through for me in relation to the kind of relationship between research and practice, or researchers and practitioners. And the first is, I think, this opportunity for practitioners to be researchers themselves. I think when these two spheres, if you like, if they ever do overlap, it's often this idea that the researcher provides the neat and shiny theory and ideas and then hands it to the practitioner to test. And it rarely goes back the other way. And what we're starting to see, certainly from the ResourceSmart team, the education team in Sustainability Victoria, is research-type questions and inquiry coming out of the team itself and actually starting for themselves to be influencing their practice and taking almost a research lens to their particular practice as well, which is really exciting, and it is much more of a collaborative partnership as well. The second point is what is the actual research there for? And one of our colleagues in the Faculty of Education, Mark Rickinson, came up with this table, which I'm liking more and more, and I'm using more and more in my own thinking, which is what he sees as this is around educational research, but you can argue it's research more broadly. Three kind of areas that drive what research is used for. So research from an instrumental perspective, in terms of research providing answers. We've got a problem, what is the solution, what is the answer? There's the idea of research at a conceptual level, which is actually what Kate was saying, which is research raising questions. Here's a gap, we don't know. What does that mean? And the third is research from a strategic perspective. So that's almost research as ammunition. We need to prove a point, we need to make a case, you give us what we do and what we need in order to do that. And from what we've seen and what I've seen, again, I'm only an emerging researcher, I haven't been working in this field a lot, but is that there's a lot of comfort from research as answers. You just give us the answers to our problem, or research as ammunition. We need to put in a funding bid, you tell us how much we should be putting in and so forth. There seems to be less comfort, but growing, with the whole research as questions. Often when you engage with researchers, you're probably frustrated in the fact that, oh gosh, they just keep raising more and more questions. But hopefully what is illustrated from the couple of years now with the education team in SV is how those questions build on each other and link into the evolution of a particular program as well. As a researcher, I've got to say, the middle one is what excites me, because that's often what is our sort of bread and butter as well. But we've certainly seen how our work has been used in the other 2 points as well, particularly with the relationship with ResourceSmart. And the third one, I think, is definitely, I suppose, a personal reflection on this purist idea of evidence-based research and evidence-based practice, and policy, and realising that the evidence is only one part of the decision-making on the part of the practitioners. And that's something that researchers need to learn, is that our ideas and our research and our theories are actually thrown into a big ball, mixed up with what the stakeholders say, what the minister's advisors say, what our resources says and what our budget says, and then an outcome comes from that. So to be clear on that mix, I think at the very beginning is much more useful in driving and directing the research, rather than having it sort of an unintended, uncomfortable conversation at the very end of the particular project as well. So Kate, those are my reflections on our relationship. Your turn.
I think that academics and our relationship with BehaviourWorks and Monash has brought a much broader perspective to what we do every day. and that these guys are much more, they're interested in doing much more than completing a consultancy. They're interested in contributing to a broader body of knowledge. They also lift us, the practitioners, out of our everyday tasks and the operational conversations that we have together, and that's a tremendously stimulating occurrence for us when we're usually, talking about invoices and budgets and all that sort of thing. So it's really inspiring, and it's given us a new respect for our own program. They're my two key lessons.
And we're getting waved at, so
are.
maybe we should leave these folk with 2 key messages. You go first.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. My key message has been definitely about the slow burn of research and how much value has been in the relationship between ResourceSmart schools and BehaviourWorks, rather than how much value has been in each individual project. This process has gradually revealed what's happening inside our program and where we can take it next. And Mark?
And I think it's being clear up front what the research is for. Is it there to provide answers? Is it there to element of raising new questions, or is it there also to provide ammunition for something as well? I think that's been the key take home for me from this. I think that brings the Kate and Mark show to an end. So over to you.
We're available for weddings, parties.